when there are bad things that happen and challenging things that happen, there are also good things that happen at the same time. And so lots of things that we hold dear in this country, whether it's civil rights, equality, the rule of law, the independence of law enforcement, which is something I care a lot about, treating the treatment of people equally before the bar of the court. A lot of those things, including the media, institutions of government, are under attack. And I don't like it. And a lot of people don't like it. But at the same time, when those things happen, when challenges arise, lots and lots of good people, lots and lots of good organizations, I think, rise up, meet the challenge, and show that there are ways to restore us back to democratic principles, legal principles, rule of law principles. So I'm very sort of excited at this time for the legal profession. So I want to thank all of you for being great lawyers who not only practice in whatever field you participate in, but also are part of organizations like this one that care about civil rights, that care about equal rights, that care about the rule of law, that care about justice. I know there are people in the corporate area and people who litigate for private companies, but at the same time, don't have the time maybe to full-time engage in public service, but engage in the public service by supporting organizations like this that care about civil rights and care about equality and working against discrimination. I'm concerned that there's an attitude in this country on the part of some folks who shall remain nameless against immigration. I'm an immigrant. I was born in India. And my father came to this country, like I'm guessing a lot of folks' parents, because he wanted a better life for his family. Diversity, I believe, is maybe not as valued in some quarters as it has been before. Not just ethnic diversity, not just gender diversity, but also diversity of faith. And as I was talking to Ali the other day, my family actually has quite a diversity of faith in it. My parents were both born in what was then India, now Pakistan. My father-in-law, who's Muslim, was born in India before partition and moved in the other direction from my own parents. And my mother-in-law was born she was born to a father who was in 1930s Germany, a lawyer, and who had to flee to Palestine because of discrimination against the Jewish community in Germany before the Holocaust, fortunately. So there's a lot of different religious diversity in my family, and I like to tell people that my children have one Hindu grandparent, one Jewish grandparent, one Sikh grandparent, and one Muslim grandparent, which I think means, if I'm doing the math correctly, makes them Episcopalian. You can clap for Episcopalians. I always clap for them. Anyway, congratulations on your work. I look forward to seeing more great stuff and to coming back another time. And now these guys are going to grill me.
Why should people be concerned regardless of party? Why this transcends Democrat and Republican, and why the rule of law has to be upheld regardless what party's in power?
The answer to your questions are yes, yes, no, yes. No. Look, so it was not hard to predict that Michael Cohen be convicted of a crime or charged with a crime, because I think at the time I said that, his office, his hotel room, and his home had been searched by the very estimable agents who were working with former prosecutors, former colleagues of mine at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. And my thinking was, had I been the U.S. Attorney, given the high stakes, given the status of the person who was being searched, that you likely don't do that unless you think that the likelihood of a charge coming down the pike was incredibly high, because the whole world was watching. One prediction I'll make is that Roger Stone will be convicted of some crimes. Separate and apart from that, going to the spirit of your question, yeah, look, I say a lot of things about this administration, and I don't think anything that I say is partisan. It's not about Democrat or Republican. One of the things that was not mentioned in the intro that I'm very proud of, that I'm working on, is a bipartisan task force with the Brennan Center, supported by NYU, along with Governor Christie Todd Whitman, the former governor of New Jersey and the former EPA administrator under George W. Bush, that there are some things more important than party. You can disagree, hopefully agreeably and respectfully, with people about tax policy, about immigration policy, and the ways in which you increase or decrease legal immigration, how you deal with border security. You can disagree with people about Medicare. You can disagree with people about health care, about foreign policy, all sorts of things. But there's some things that come before all of that. And among those things are support for a free press, support for an independent judiciary, support for an independent law enforcement function, separation of politics from law enforcement, and among other things, decency and respectful dialogue between and among people who disagree with each other. So, it's not, I think, an exaggeration to say that the rule of law is under attack. The good news is, which you didn't necessarily ask about, is that a lot of our institutions are stronger than people think. There's a lot of stuff on the airwaves. I have guests on the podcast who decry the state of affairs, but the Constitution is pretty good. And the structure that we have in this country is pretty good. And so even if the President of the United States decides he's going to denigrate a member of the intelligence community or admonish and criticize and mock a member of the judiciary, they still have a certain amount of cachet, the judges in particular, the media in particular. And so even if a President of the United States says fake news, or we're going to take away the credentials of that particular press official and not let them come to the White House, or says we want to change the libel laws, the ability to really quash the press is low. So I think the institutions are much stronger than people think. On the other hand, I do think you can't be complacent about it, and there's lots and lots of things that if they go unaddressed and if they are allowed to be normalized, are terrible for the country.
So it's another softball question. You being the former sheriff of Wall Street and someone who took on corruption head-on, if evidence rises to the appropriate level, would you have any hesitation in prosecuting a sitting president of the United States, knowing that his or her fate and perhaps the stability of the entire nation would be resting on the shoulders of 12 jurors from a randomly selected jury pool?
That's not a fraud question at all. Look, there is, not to be too legalistic about it, any case that involves public corruption and that involves an allegation and a potential trial against an elected official is a big deal. And we did a lot of that when I was U.S. Attorney and before, and they're still doing it now. Whether you're the state Senate Majority Leader or the Speaker of the Assembly, or you're investigating but choosing not to prosecute both the mayor of the city of New York and also the governor of the state of New York. That's a big deal, and we thought always, I think, very carefully about it. Not that anyone is above the law, but if you choose to investigate someone who's been elected to office and you're not careful about how you go about it, both in the investigation of it and in the prosecution of it, remember, those folks are not ordinary citizens, and even though it's the case, as I've said a couple times, no one is above the law, you need to be careful not to sort of undermine the will of the people. If someone was lawfully elected to a position, you have to be very, very cognizant of the fact that sometimes the mere opening of an investigation and the taking of actions in connection with your investigation may cause the electorate to have a particular view. I mean, we saw this, whatever your point of, whatever your perspective is, on Jim Comey, on taking actions or not taking actions in advance of an election, it has a huge impact. And so there are, prudential guidelines, I think, at the Department of Justice certainly, and I think hopefully at other prosecutors' offices to take great care in what actions you take against a public official. We never took those on in a blasé way, which is not to say you need more evidence or there's a different standard of proof if you're elected than if you're an ordinary citizen. But man, you got to be careful about what you do. So that's a general statement about how you deal with those things, and you need to be very cautious, even if you're going to be aggressive, as my old office is and always has been, and I hope always will be. With respect to the president, there is, I think, a view that is not correct that Bob Mueller, I'm going to put it on him, not on me, that Bob Mueller, if he finds certain kinds of evidence, is going to charge the president. He's not going to do that. There has never been, in my mind, a likelihood that this president is going to be charged by Bob Mueller, and never been a likelihood that this president is going to be charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, mostly because there's prevailing wisdom at the department in the form of, I think, 2 OLC, Office of Legal Counsel opinions. You can disagree with them. Smart scholars have said there's arguments to the contrary, but the prevailing wisdom at the Department of Justice, going back a number of years, is that you cannot, not necessarily can't indict, not charge, but you cannot prosecute a sitting president. And you can disagree with it, and you can think it's a bad policy, but that's the prevailing wisdom, that's the guidelines of the department. And what I've always said about Bob Mueller, and I would...
He's a friend of yours, by the way.
He's not a friend of mine, but I respect him enormously, and I've worked with him in a number of contexts, and I have enormous respect for him. I don't think any other human being on the planet, no one's perfect, you don't put anyone on a pedestal, but if there's anyone who could have undertaken this in a way that was fair, it's Bob Mueller. But if you're going to decide to take a shot at the sitting president of the United States, that's the most high-stakes investigation, the most watched investigation in the history of the country in some ways, and also has an impact on the world, I don't think, even if you think there's evidence of a crime, given the prevailing wisdom and the guidelines in the department, I don't think as a matter of prudence that you bring that case when you're in the minority legal position. And so lots of people who hate the president, and trust me, I'm with you guys, lots of people who don't like what the president is doing to the country hope to get rid of him in some way. So they look to Bob Mueller as a savior, or they look to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District as saviors, or they look to the 25th Amendment, which is never going to be invoked, I'm sorry folks, as a way to get rid of a political figure they don't like. It's not going to happen. There's a reason why we have an impeachment process. Maybe that will happen, maybe it won't. But the short answer to your question is,
wait till he's out of office, then indict him.
Yeah, I think so. And again, which is not to say that I know that there's evidence that you could prove beyond a reasonable doubt, even if he was an ordinary citizen. But even if you had that, I think it's just a bridge too far, whether or not that disappoints people or not.
I do feel like DOJ has had some responsibility in the Muslim equals terrorist perspective that Americans have now. When there's someone who does a commensurate crime that could be charged as terrorism, but they're not Muslim, they tend to not get charged as a terrorist, where if you're brown, you get charged as a terrorist for the same crime. Upstate New York right now, we have one with the Islamberg folks who were trying to blow up Islamberg or whatever it was. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, because I feel like we're in this moment now where I think with Trump in power, everyone is suddenly far more pro-Muslim than they were in the last 20 years. But, in 2 years, if everything goes well and he's not there, I think we might be back in the same boat.
Yeah, no, thanks for your question. As a general matter, I think everyone should be treated equally. And whether you're from the Muslim community or the Jewish community or the Sikh community or the Hindu community or the Christian community, if you have engaged in certain actions, you should apply the same statutes to those folks. And I don't disagree with you that there may be, as we see in a lot of different communities, including the African American community, to be sure, whether it's conscious bias or implicit bias, a favoritism to harsher penalties and the application of harsher statutes, again, either because people think deliberately that we must do this, or they unconsciously are applying those statutes and harsher penalties because there's something going on that they're not fully aware of. One of the chapters in my book is sort of about this very question of confirmation bias that we all have to be careful of. It's not a case from my office, but I don't know if folks remember, I'm guessing some people in this group who are lawyers in this community may, but there was a gentleman by the name of Brandon Mayfield who, after the Madrid bombings on 3/11 in 2004, where 191 people were killed by terrorists, the FBI was given the plastic bag of detonators that the SNP, the Spanish National Police, found near the scene of the crime, and through the fingerprint experts at the FBI, they found a match. And the match they found was to a white American gentleman named Brandon Mayfield, who lived in Portland, Oregon. And they thought to themselves, well, what the hell is this guy doing being involved with a terrorist attack they believed by, a certain kind of person in Madrid? And I spent 20 pages talking about the case because as an initial matter, you can't say that the fingerprint experts were biased. It turned out to be a wrong match. But after the first fingerprint expert, the second fingerprint expert, the third fingerprint expert all said this latent fingerprint 17, was latent fingerprint 17, matched this guy who had been honorably discharged from the Army. That's why his fingerprints were in the database, Brandon Mayfield. They found 3 or 4 other facts. Turns out that this white American lawyer in Portland, Oregon, had converted to Islam, had married an Egyptian who was Muslim, frequented a mosque that some folks in law enforcement thought was, frequented by questionable people, and had represented in a non-criminal case, but in a child custody matter, someone who had been convicted of material support of Al-Qaeda. And so what happened? Even though they could find no other evidence that he had traveled to Spain, no connectivity to anyone who had engaged in terrorism in connection with the 3/11 attack, nothing at all, they could find nothing else, the FBI and the prosecutors in Oregon felt some amount of comfort that they had gotten the right guy. Why? Because there was some perception that this person had to be the guy because he was Muslim. And not only was he converted to Islam. And at the end of the day, the Spanish National Police disputed the fingerprint match and found another person who I think was Muslim Algerian, whose fingerprints matched, but it wasn't the American. And the FBI did a thing that they never do, which was they apologized to Brandon Mayfield, who spent 2 weeks in custody after having been under 24-hour surveillance because they had made an error. So there are lots of object lessons, not just in current times. People like to talk about what the environment is now and with President Trump. This was 17 years ago. And we always need to be diligent and careful and honest about how we're making our decisions and how we should be making our decisions. So I appreciate the question.
And I want to really begin by thanking you all for being here. It's such a pleasure and an honor to host you all on behalf of Amal. And I also want to relate to you, just to start off with a personal experience of my own. When I became an attorney, it was a while ago, and Amal had not yet existed. And I got a lot of naysayers who told me that I couldn't, that I shouldn't, that I wouldn't. And I think a lot of that was embedded in my identity as a Muslim, as a woman, and as a person of color. The thing is that the naysayers didn't know that when you tell a Muslim, a person of color, and a woman that they can't do something, they're gonna do it. AMA stands for the American Muslim Association of Lawyers, and it's a group of attorneys who have come together to support one another, to help our community, to defend our community, and to push for policies that are good for our community. And that means fighting a lot of injustice. And we need our entire community to be behind us, but we also need our entire community to be aware of what is going on. So if you have questions, contact us, contact Amal, contact your other Islamic organizations. We're here for you, and we need you to be here for us. Jazakumullah khairan.
It's a great, an incredible event. We're really happy and see that this is something of one event of a kind. When we have Preet Bharara come speak, we are really blessed with the attendance of many important people, public officials, judges, lawyers. And I think we need many of those events as professional organizations, Muslim professional organization. We need to really make sure we have more interaction, and we are a major contributor to this country. We are doctors, lawyers, and executives, and I think we the cream of the cream. And I'm really happy that we are organizing this event. Amal is a strong advocate for justice. To that end, Amal has been vocal against racial and religious discrimination, bias crimes, and racial profiling. Following the Muslim ban order, Amal lawyers volunteered to assist immigrants who were not allowed back to the US. Amal lawyers conducted training offered lectures, and wrote articles on how to oppose Muslim ban effectively. Along with other bar associations, civil rights organizations, and law firms, Amal filed amicus brief to challenge the Muslim ban. Amal drafted legislation with public officials on various legal matters to strengthen the constitutional protection of minorities. Notably, Amal led the coalition against the Henshaw proposed settlement in 2016, which was not favorable to the Muslim community and other minorities.
Back when 9/11 happened, in the first 3.5 months after that, I was essentially the clearinghouse for 103 cases that I had to find lawyers for. Because at that time, when someone's being accused of terrorism or anything related to that, right after 9/11, it was very difficult to find lawyers who would take those cases. And I found many folks within our own community of Muslim lawyers. And while maybe I was one of the first into the foxhole, I was in the foxhole always for the last 20 years with Muslim American lawyers. You have all been there throughout the fight. And it's a fight that we had to wage. It was a fight not just for justice and equality, but it was a fight for, quite frankly, the canary in the coal mine to survive, and that was us. And if we died out, the Constitution would die out. We were fighting for the Constitution. And we have done that for 20 years since September 11th. I have been not only a member, but inspired by the work of many of the folks in this room. And I think the Muslim community is well served by the lawyers in their community. They've been standing up for the Constitution, they've been fighting for this community, and they've been trying to make sure that this community has a voice.
And tonight was a great night. It was a celebration of Muslim lawyers who are active in our community, who are fighting for the civil rights of not just Muslims, but of all people, because when you fight for civil rights for any community, you're defending it for all. It's also great to have the former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara here to talk about his experiences, his work. But tonight was truly a celebration of our community, and it was great to see people of all different backgrounds. Some there's Muslims sitting with us, standing shoulder to shoulder with us in a very difficult time. So it was a lot of fun.